Hello and welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Blow, your host. Very pleased they've joining me today. Howard Lazarus, City Administrator for the City of Ann Arbor. Welcome back to Conversations.
Oh, it's good to be back.
And we're now ending, well, not quite ending 2018, but into the home stretch, so to speak. Beginning, the second year of a two-year budget cycle for the city. So we're sort of getting into the projects that have been planned. How has 2018 been for the city, you can say, so far? What are you most, I won't say proud of, but what has been accomplished?
I think externally, it's the first year where we've done a significant amount of preventive maintenance on our road projects. We recently got the results of the National Citizen Survey that showed that 97% of the residents believe this is a great place to raise your kids.
Great.
We've gone up in every area or stayed the same or improved resident satisfaction. The city remains financially healthy, and internally we've recruited some really exceptional leaders for the future.
You mentioned the road projects, and partly because of weather, partly because of whether it was a strike or just a delay in construction for 3 or 4 weeks. The major projects that have been going on, as well as the neighborhood projects, do all of them appear as if they'll be able to be completed before the snow comes, assuming it doesn't start tomorrow?
Well, I believe we'll get all of them completed, and at the worst case, we'll have a wearing surface down that we can maintain through the winter period. Right. But one thing that we did do this summer for the first time is that we did do a lot of capital maintenance. So you've seen new surfaces on Huron Parkway, on Main Street, Ann Arbor, Saline Road, and Stadium. So those treatments not only make a better surface to drive on, but they seal the roads to prevent deterioration. And that kind of capital maintenance work will be a bigger part of our efforts going into the future.
And looking both at the end of this year and looking to next year, are there other still major road projects that will get started come the spring? And what do we have to look forward to as far as that ongoing reconstruction as opposed to just the maintenance?
Well, we'll still work on residential neighborhood streets and do repair as we've done in the past. We'll continue the capital maintenance program. And I'm trying to think what's on the calendar for next year. There are some improvements that are related to developments as well.
Because this year I know Pauline was a major you could say effort that all summer in a sense now because of the delays have gone on, and some other larger projects. But you mentioned the maintenance and is that an effort to sort of not just address, you might say, the worst streets, but those that, as you say, can be maintained to prevent them from deteriorating?
Well, actually, the maintenance efforts go on streets that haven't yet got to the point where they're unsatisfactory, and it extends the life of the pavement without having to do major upgrades. So it seals the surface from moisture getting into it and causing potholes. Right. And it's actually a pretty good savings on the dollar spent. Usually for a road reconstruction, it costs anywhere between $500,000 and $1 million per mile, where doing the maintenance costs $50,000, $100,000 per mile. So it's much more effective to preserve the life and protect the asset.
You mentioned also that in the past year that you've been able to hire and bring on board into the city new individuals to help in both your job, you might say, in running the city, but also in dealing with the population. What are the new positions of the new people in the areas that they are going to be addressing and having to fulfill?
Well, let's start with the Assistant City Administrator, who will provide sort of a Chief of Staff function, run the internal functions of the Administrator's office, but also be the number 2 in the city. Will take over some of the committee assignments that I have. Will also help on some special projects that are going on. And will free time for us to look at strategic planning, coordinate more with our external partners, and to provide a little bit more breathing room for all of us. We've hired a new fire chief, and we have 2 new assistant chiefs. We've hired a sustainability and innovations officer as well. So that's quite a bit of new blood that's been introduced into the city. The main vacancy that we still have is a new police chief. We did hire a new deputy chief over the last year as well.
And in looking at that and working with the police department, just recently, council has listened to and have they approved or at least passed on first reading, or have they actually approved a creation of a community citizen police commission?
Sure. At the October 15th meeting, they had the second reading of the
Okay.
ordinance to establish what's been called the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission. So they will now go through the process once the new council is seated of recruiting the members for that commission, and we'll get it up and running probably right after the first of the year.
Okay. And so having that completed, now the focus is toward the individual who will oversee and head up the police department.
Right, we need a new police chief.
And what do you know what the process is or will be concerning that in the general time frame?
Sure, we just have received proposals for an external recruiter to assist. Working with the city staff, we're going to put in place an outreach process so that we can get community input on the characteristics that we'd like to see in the new chief, and then ultimately help us with the review and selection process. I committed to having the police commission assist us on that, so hopefully the timing will come together sometime in January when we're able to bring in candidates and have members of the commission help interview them, and then probably late February, early March, have a new chief in place.
And you mentioned the timing a little bit, that with this new commission to be established, most likely right after the first of the year, one of the first things you might say they will be involved in from your perspective is getting them involved in that whole selection process.
That's correct.
Of the chief. And it would seem to make sense that in that, you could say, whole timing, now having in place the commission, having an individual who is able to not only support but work with a citizen group as opposed to just, you could say, the officers.
Well, I think certainly getting the commission in place was important before we recruited, because it takes some of the uncertainty out, and people who may have felt uncomfortable walking in to a situation where they don't know what the commission would look like would have hurt our recruiting efforts. We're fortunate in Ann Arbor to have a most exceptional police department, but the truth is there are parts of the community that always don't have great relationships with our police or other police departments. I know that every single officer in the Ann Arbor Police Department wants to be engaged, wants to provide the support to the community in a way that's acceptable and promotes better relationships. So the commission will help us get there. They'll review police procedures. They'll help with the complaint review process, and they'll help with the outreach and community connections. So I'm looking forward to a very positive experience, but that's not to say there won't be times where the communication is difficult at times.
Right. You also mentioned that the budget process and that you're going into the second year of a 2-year cycle. You've been the administrator for how long?
About 2.5 years.
So you came in at a time when the city was starting or had already started coming out of the downturn in the late 2000s and early teens. Where do we stand as a city with respect to budget, with revenue and expenses, and in general, how are things going for the city?
Sure. Our budget, our fiscal year starts July 1st, so we're well into the second year of the current 2-year program. As we look to fiscal year 20 and 21, generally we're in good shape. We start where we stand now is we're about $800,000 off on balancing sources and uses of funds.
And
but
that's out of how many? I mean, if it's out of $1 million, then it's a lot, but obviously it's not.
Well, that's on the general fund side.
Okay.
The general fund is about 25% of our what we spend every year, and the general fund is about $106 million.
So being off by that amount is I won't say not significant, but it's not a backbreaker.
No, at this point in the budget cycle, it's very much a workable place to be.
Right.
I think most cities would like to be where we are. We're in good shape. We don't have a lot of outstanding debt. Our tax base is stable and growing, and all of our enterprise funds are all in good shape. And we're in reasonably good position as it relates to pension and post-employment benefits. So we're in good shape going into the new 2-year cycle.
Just to clarify, you mentioned the general fund, which is about 25%
Right.
of the total. That is what the council and to a certain extent you and the people within City Hall have some flexibility in the sense that you've got 3/4 of the budget, you have less flexibility, correct?
Well, 3/4 of the budget are governed by fees for services, so there's flexibility in there.
Yes.
The water and wastewater systems,
As far as what you charge
stormwater.
people. Yeah.
Those we have flexibility in terms of the capital improvements, but they are really paying for the ongoing operations. There's the capital improvement program, but the general fund addresses the core of what people look at in terms of city services, police, fire. Part of the parks budget comes out of the general fund. General administration comes out of there, and it's about 70 to 75% personnel costs.
Right, and the personnel costs are partially set by the agreements with unions and
Right.
the pay structure that's set up that way. Which once those decisions have been made, once again, the flexibility is not as much as what might be on other aspects of the general fund.
We do. Labor rates are set by union agreement. I will tell you that we are at a point where the first time in a very long time, all of our union contracts are current.
Great.
So that helps us as we look to project to the future. But those are 3 to 4 year deals. They all have a set of steps of salary increases and adjustments in them, and that becomes part of our planning.
Well, we're going to take a short break, come back and look at the plans and look into 2020 and beyond and how the public can get involved in that.
Sure.
Ask our viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Ann Arbor is home to more than 150 parks. That's 150 reasons to get out and get active around town. In addition to more traditional parks, Ann Arbor has some unique amenities, like the Universal Access Playground, Ann Arbor Skate Park, and 2 disc golf courses, all free of charge. With all of this and more, Ann Arbor is sure to have something fun for everyone. Come out and see for yourself. Visit a2gov.org/parks or call 734-794-6230 for more information.
Here at CTN, we offer a variety of different training workshops for our Ann Arbor residents as well as local nonprofits. Learn about different editing programs, Final Cut Pro, iMovie, and even Motion is available. Or how about studio production? You can even sign up for our Hotline Studio Workshop, where you can direct and produce your own television show. Go online to a2gov.org/CTN and head over to our Workshops tab. There, you can find a link to our convenient online sign-up sheet, as well as an in-depth description of what each workshop has to offer. CTN. Connect, create, communicate.
Hello and welcome back to Conversations. I'm speaking this afternoon with Howard Lazarus, City Administrator for Ann Arbor. Talked briefly about some of the budget aspects that you're in right now, but looking beyond, at the present time, you mentioned that we're in the second year of a cycle, so we're beginning to look at budgetary issues for what, 2020, 21?
Right.
Okay. And one of the things is getting, you could say, citizen community input. And when I was on council in the 80s, we'd have budget meetings where the public was invited to attend city council and voice opinions on different areas. Nowadays, how is it done? How are the public and the citizens of Ann Arbor able to provide input in budgetary concerns?
Well, the council's deliberations are still open to the public, and we still have very, very strong interest at those meetings. But there are two tools that will help influence the process this year as well. One I mentioned before is the National Citizen Survey, which is a statistically significant survey that's done through a third party. The other is something that was sponsored actually by Councilmember Lum, to have a trending type survey where people can go through the city's website
yeah.
and then state, it's kind of a, where would you like to spend more money, this or that, how would you rate your perceptions of all these different services. Those two combined will give us some great insight, as well as the continued input directly from our residents, as well as from our council members.
You mentioned the online survey. People can go to the city website, and do you know how long that survey? How long does it take for the average citizen? Let's say.
Well, I actually did it this morning,
okay.
and it took about 10 to 12 minutes. I think if you're not as familiar with how the city's structured, it's maybe 15. It's easy to use, and it really does ask your opinion on where would you like to see more focus on the city's effort.
Right, and that would be predominantly the general fund budget, as we were talking about, or really all aspects and different of the enterprise funds in that potentially.
Well, it asks about your feeling about water, wastewater.
Okay.
It has some questions about overall quality of life. Certainly the ever-present question about road condition. But it also then does address, so it really doesn't talk about specific funding sources.
Okay.
It asks about services.
Services, okay. And do you know how council will use that along with the national survey, and, or more importantly, how will you use it? Because you put together a proposed budget, so it's really comes to you first, you might say.
Right. To the extent that we have discretion in some areas of the budget, we'll align the priorities with those things that the public would like to see us do better.
And council will also provide input as you begin the process, or do they pretty much stay out of it until it gets presented, then they go into more detail in the different areas?
Well, it's hard to believe our council would not be engaged in that discussion, but we have our kickoff meeting with them in December.
Okay.
It'll be over at the downtown library. It is a work session that's open to the public. And we'll talk about strategic initiatives, the way the council would like to go. And then from that, the city staff and I will develop a budget proposal for next year. We'll have open meetings on that in the February timeframe, and my budget is due to council in April.
In April, and then they have until the end of May to either accept it, amend it, whatever.
Right, they can amend it, they can approve it. They have to approve it by the end of the second meeting in May. Otherwise, the administrator's proposal becomes the budget.
Regardless of anything they talked about, if they have not amended it and voted the amended budget into place by the end of that second meeting, then it goes back to what you proposed.
That's correct.
Okay. And in that process, we have elections come November. You mentioned that you'll have the opening sort of meeting. That'll be with the new council members.
That's correct.
Okay, so you'll be starting with those who will be approving it come May. And there are a couple, well, actually just one major, you say, topic or voting item. To what extent does an election either slow you and, you say, the administration, I won't say down, but do you take into account that you can't always plan everything depending on the results of an election? Or do you just go ahead every day of the year regardless of the politics?
Well, council is the policy-making arm of local government. We are in the middle of a budget year. The budget really establishes the roadmap With new council members, there'll be some discussion about policies and direction. That'll be going on at the same time we're looking at what the budget plan,
Okay.
financial plan will be. But throughout the year, council still has the requirement to approve contracts. They still provide oversight of what we're doing, and we still report to them on a monthly and quarterly basis on expenditures and performance measures. So the relationship with council is ongoing, but the big opportunity each year, particularly in the every other year when we do the 2-year plan, is to establish the goals and put the resources towards them, and we'll be going through that process over the next 6 to 8 months.
Okay, so the election itself, timing is in certain ways good in that you'll be able to work with the new council, whatever that might be, as you're putting that 2-year plan together.
Absolutely.
And even though a year from now, some members might change, at least you have a framework that then a new group coming in a year from now will be able to work with.
Well, remember, the council a couple of years ago went to 4-year terms.
Right.
So we'll have
That's true,
stability.
yes. Now.
And the benefit through either design or cosmic accident is that we do the heavy lifting on the 2-year budget in a non-election year. So it really does stay away from election year politics
Yes.
and gives us all a chance to have good, strong conversations about priorities without an election pending. And then the other benefit is that council members, now that they're on board for 4 years, have the chance to develop their backgrounds, their expertise, and then apply that to the things that their constituents want
Right.
them to do.
Well, good. And in looking at 2019, other than the budget, what are some of your goals? What are some of the plans looking into the next 6 to 12 months that you want the city to sort of move toward?
Well, I think part of the discussion is to help council come to a consensus on what development projects look like and what that means. Certainly, we're going to spend a lot of time addressing how people get around, mobility issues, connecting the community, making us live up to the standard of being warm and welcoming like we profess to be, and then establishing the relationships between the police department and all aspects of our community are things that you'll see next calendar year. There are opportunities for us to address some of the finances as well underlying the city, readdress the capital improvement program as well. So all those things will be addressed over the coming year. But it's an exciting time. It's one of great stability and opportunity for us as a community.
Two unrelated, you say, issues. One, over the last couple of years and most recently, last couple of months in Ann Arbor and other areas of Michigan, the issue of water and the water quality and contamination of drinking water. Where does Ann Arbor stand as far as the water treatment facility and the water in Ann Arbor from what you are aware of?
So our drinking water comes from the Huron River, and there have been concerns about contaminants, particularly PFAS, fluorinated compounds. We have been ahead of the curve. We've been doing some pilots at the water treatment plant, and we can treat almost to a level of non-detect and certainly well below the current EPA advisory limits, as well as any potential regulatory limits that will be put in place. Providing a safe and reliable source of water is a fundamental responsibility of local government, and it's a public trust, and we're well ahead of any potential requirements. There are some other contaminants, biologic, that we were also well ahead of the curve on addressing those.
Well, one of the things that has been going on since the 80s goes back to the plume from the old Gelman.
Right.
And a year, 2 years ago, that became more of a discussion again. Any new information on the spreading of the plume or what is potentially going to be done, not just locally, but state, as far as the state government and their role in addressing it?
So let me start at the back and work forward. Certainly, there's no imminent danger of the plume migrating into the river, and even if it were, between the dilution and our treatment processes, it wouldn't be a drinking water problem for us. The city right now is engaged in discussions with both the responsible parties and the state. It is subject to some gag orders from a legal standpoint, so there's a little bit of a limit to what I can talk about.
Right. But it is being ongoingly looked at, and the concern is there, and as you say, there is no potential, you could say, threat that we are aware of now of it getting into the the drinking water or impacting the drinking water.
Not in the short term,
right.
and the efforts of the city, the other surrounding municipalities, the county as well as the state, are to slow down and halt the migration of the contaminant.
A second sort of regional issue that we've had for years deals with transportation. You mentioned mobility within the city, but looking at the southeast Michigan area, there is still talk of potential train or some type of mass transit, if not the 5 counties, then maybe Wayne, Washtenaw, maybe Oakland, and also potentially going up into Livingston County. Are discussions still going on about the possibility of some new form or added form of mass transit for Southeast Michigan, including Ann Arbor?
The next time the RTA, the Regional Transit Authority, can put a millage on the ballot, I believe, is in 2020. So that's still there. What we've been working on is that intersection among transportation or mobility, technology, and social equity, and trying to find ways to use technology better to manage our trips, to have more destination-to-destination travel rather than station-to-station, as a way
What's
to.
the difference with that?
Well, if you when you use Uber, it takes you directly to where you want to go. If you can have larger buses and vehicles taking people more directly to where they want to go instead of having to go from one station to another and then transfer, you're talking about a one-seat ride, and I think it's more comfortable. I think it's what people demand now, and we can use technology to enable that. It certainly helps people leave their car at home, whereas you may not be willing to do that if you have to take a train from one station to another, find another way to get around.
Right. The issue of, great, you can get to the train station, but what do you do once you get there if it's not next door to where you're hoping to get to ultimately?
Part of it also is to help people stay in their homes longer, to address people who are most vulnerable in our community, to be able to get to their appointments, pick up their medications, have things delivered to their home. And if we can manage all that using a technological approach, it just makes people's lives easier, and it gets rid of the need to maintain a car, which is a big cost item in people's budgets.
I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to have you here on Conversations.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
I want to thank our viewers for joining us today and look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.